I'm sure some of you have worked out the missing word from these quotes is habit, and that's going to be the topic of the talk today. So what exactly is meant by habit? This seems obvious, as habits are just actions that you do regularly. People often point to good ones, like exercise, or bad ones, like smoking. However, what habits really are is something quite specific. They are those things you started off doing deliberately. You had to think about them to do them, and made a clear choice to do so, but at some point stopped thinking about them, but still did them anyway, often every day. So for example, anyone that has a habit of running made the decision to put on their running gear and go for a run. Over time this becomes a habit and they do it without really thinking. When they get up in the morning they just put on their running gear and go for a run, or they head to the gym just after work. Of course they're aware they're doing it, but they don't have to think about it in the same way they did when they first started. Unfortunately, the same is also true for bad habits like smoking. Any smoker at some point made the decision to pick up a cigarette, light it and inhale the smoke. However, once they've been smoking for some time, they get to the point where they see a pack of cigarettes and automatically pick up a cigarette and start smoking without really thinking about it. Of course they're aware they're doing it, just like a runner is, but they don't think about it in the same way they did when they first started. Now these are two quite obvious examples of habits, but there are hundreds of others you would not really think of. So for example, tying your shoelaces is a habit. It is something that when you first started doing, you really had to think hard about, as actually tying your shoelaces is quite complicated. However, once you've done it hundreds of times, it is something that you really don't have to think about. You just put on your shoes and do up your laces. You've got lots of other habits like getting dressed, having a shower, and getting your breakfast together. Now these are habits for your morning routine, but you've got lots of other habits as well, such as the way you speak to other people, or your study habits, both at home or at school, the habits of watching TV, and your habit of how you use your phone, including social media. When you understand habits in this way, it should not surprise you that researchers looking at how people spend most of their time found that 40% of the actions people do each day are habits. As so much of the time is taken up by habits, they're extremely powerful and have the potential to do a lot of good. For example, in order for an athlete to achieve their best, they need to develop the right habits. They need to make sure they eat the right food and get enough rest, warm up properly, and of course train hard. But what is true for athletes is true for anyone. Any person that wants to do their best in whatever area needs to develop the right habits. As habits are powerful, they have the potential to do a lot of good, but also a lot of harm. The most obvious examples are addictions to drugs and alcohol, which can destroy your life and quite literally kill you. However, people can get addicted to other things, for example gambling. These people often spend money they can't afford and lie and even steal from friends and family. Also, computer gaming is increasingly seen as a possible addiction. Just in the same way that most people that drink are not alcoholics, most people that play computer games don't have a problem with it, but some clearly do. People can even become addicted to shopping. This is similar to gambling, as people spend money they can't afford, often buying clothes they will never use. People can even become addicted to sex. Now this may seem comical until you understand the effect it can have on people's personal lives. For example, Tiger Woods ended up checking himself into a clinic for sex addiction after cheating on his wife. I know you're often told that the key to having a successful life is in making the right choices. That by making the right choices you'll get the best grades you're capable of at school, a job that you enjoy, that pays you well enough to live off when you get older. That the right choices will give you happiness in your personal life with friends, family and loved ones. And that through the right choices and with a bit of luck, you'll have good health now and as you get older. Of course there's much to this. The choices you make do really make a difference. However, this focus on choice is really missing something out. That much of what you do each day is not really a choice as people think about it, but instead a habit. Also many of the big choices you'll make, for example, what job to do, or where to live, or who to choose as your life partner. The right choice is not always obvious. For this reason it's worth focusing more on habits, as habits have a huge impact on making your life a success. It is clear what good and bad habits are, and they are something you can work on improving. When you understand the importance of habit, it should make you look at your time at school in a different way. Now you may have asked yourself, what's the point of school? Nobody needs to know everything they're taught at school. Nearly everyone needs to know how to read and write, as well as some basic maths. And some people may need to know other things they're taught at school. So for example, if you become an engineer, you'll need to know something more advanced maths you're taught at GCSE. But you'll not need to go in to explain Hitler's rise to power, or how glaciers are formed, or why Romeo and Juliet couldn't make it work. This leads to the rather obvious question, is school that important? You need to be clear that it really is. Is getting a good education is the key to many jobs and training opportunities that you simply will not have otherwise. In fact, research has been done showing that getting 5 good GCSEs, including maths and English, adds an extra £80,000 to your earnings over a lifetime, while A-levels adds a further £60,000. Now this is a life-changing amount of money. However, it's not just the extra money that a better education gives you, it's also the extra choice over what you do. So it's clear that school and your grades are important for your future success, but maybe not in the way you think. In fact, an interesting project was done in America where pupils that had good grades but were in danger of dropping out of school sat their exams early. The idea is that they would get their qualifications before dropping out and go on to do just as well as everyone else. In some ways the project worked well, as people sat their exams early and did get their qualifications. However, when these pupils were tracked down a few years later in the early 20s, they were not doing well at all. In fact, they were doing just as badly as those pupils that had dropped out of school with no qualifications. For this group, their education made no difference. This is confusing as we know that education is important, but for this group it didn't seem to work. Understanding something like this is very complicated, but I think part of the reason can be explained by habit. Normally people that get good grades in school tend to go on to do well, but also those people tend to get those good grades by having good habits. And those habits also help them later on. If you happen to have pupils that get good grades simply because they find their schoolwork easy but have bad habits, these habits will cause them problems later on. Some of you may be thinking, I don't need qualifications, I just need good habits. But you need both. Grades are important, but just on their own they're not enough. Knowing the importance of habits should make you want to work doubly hard at school, as not only does hard work help you with good grades, it also helps you develop good habits. There are two types of pupils that should think quite differently about how well they're doing at school now you know the importance of habit. There are those pupils who, despite having bad habits, get pretty good grades as they find schoolwork easy. First of all, these pupils are underachieving, as with more effort their grades will be better. More worryingly, they're not developing the habits they need to lead to success later on. Alternatively, there's another type of pupil who does everything they can and works really hard, but never gets the grades that they want. If you're one of those pupils, you may be thinking, is the hard work all really worth it? Maybe I should just give up. You need to know that low grades are often turned around with hard work, but even if you leave school without the qualifications you want, your time at school has not been wasted, as you've built good habits. We've talked about why habits are so important, but now we're going to look at how habits actually work. To do this, you need to start off by looking at your brain. On a very simple level, the upper part of the brain deals with more complex thinking. This is the part of the brain that's working when you're laughing at a joke or solving a puzzle. The lower part of your brain deals with more automatic behaviours, like breathing. When an action becomes a habit, it stops being done by the higher part of the brain and starts to be done instead by the lower, more automatic part. This is shown by a study where rats were put in mazes that they would explore to find food. To begin with, the scientists could see that the higher parts of the brain were working to find the food. However, as they did this again and again, they could see the lower parts of the brain start to take over. The action had become a habit, and the rat was finding their way to the food without really thinking. Exactly the same things happen with people. The very first time you're given directions somewhere new, you think hard about how to get there. However, once you've made this journey again and again, and it's become a habit, you don't really have to think about it at all. Just think about your journey to school. The power of this lower automatic part of the brain, and how it can work quite separately from the higher part, can be shown by looking at the case of a man called Eugene Pauly. As a younger man, he got a virus that badly damaged the upper part of his brain. This is a person that you can have the same conversation with every few minutes, as he could not remember what he had just said. When he was asked to sketch a map of the downstairs part of his house and show how to get from there to the bathroom, he would say he had no idea. But it's not quite true to say that he didn't know. While the upper part of his brain was badly damaged, the lower part worked just fine. And like anyone else, he had a habit of going to the loo. So he could get up and walk from his sitting room to the loo without any problem, although he could not give you directions how he was going to get there. In a similar way, he could not tell you where his house was on the street that he lived, but as he had a habit of going for the walk each day, he'd get up and walk down the block and find his way back to his house without any problem. You can also see how the lower automatic part of the brain can work quite independently from the higher part by looking at sleepwalkers. Now, for most people, when they go to sleep, their brain turns off their ability to move, apart from very basic things like rolling over. But this is not true for sleepwalkers. But why does it mean these people can get up and walk round in their sleep? The answer is that walking is something that the lower part of the brain does, so you can do it without even being awake. This is also the reason why sleepwalkers have been found doing other things that the automatic part of the brain does, like eating, or even more worryingly, driving. So when something becomes a habit, the automatic part of your brain does it. What is also important to understand is the automatic part of your brain not only does the action, but also decides when to start the action in the first place. Of course, you're still aware of what you're doing. This is the reason why people do hundreds of things each day without really thinking about them, from getting dressed and brushing your teeth to travelling to school and checking your phone. In fact, all habits have three parts. The first is the trigger that gets the automatic part of the brain to start the action. The second is the action itself. And the final part is the reward, which is why you do the action. For example, With the habit of brushing your teeth, the trigger may be a certain time of day, like just after breakfast or before getting ready for bed. The action itself is brushing your teeth. The reward is having clean teeth, or more accurately, the feeling of having clean teeth. In fact, the reason why your teeth tingle after brushing them is that the chemical citric acid is added to toothpaste to give you that feeling, even though it doesn't clean your teeth. In fact, before this chemical was added to toothpaste, hardly anyone had the habit of brushing their teeth, as there was no reward for it. This may seem silly, but just think about brushing your teeth and not getting that tingling feeling. It would just not be the same. In a similar way, chemicals are added to soaps to make them bubble and foam as a reward for using them. Again, this may seem silly, but just imagine washing with soap that did not foam. It just would not be the same. All habits have these three parts: the trigger, the action itself, and the reward. Think about using a mobile phone. The trigger could be something like the ping of a notification. The reward could be a feeling of connecting with other people. When a habit is firmly established, you start to crave the reward as soon as you experience the trigger. This is why you find it so hard not to check your mobile phone when you know you've got a message. You should know that people designing your mobile phones and the apps that go on them know everything there is to know about habits. And if you're spending a large amount of time on your phone, you're being manipulated. We've talked about how there are many different types of habit, but you should also know that there are many different types of triggers as well. For example, someone has a habit of drinking a fizzy drink may have the sight of their favourite fizzy drink as a trigger. A trigger can also be a certain time of day. For example, many people first in the morning make a coffee, which often forms part of a wider morning routine. A trigger can also be an emotion. For example, people face feelings of stress or anxiety, sometimes overeat. The company of certain people may be a trigger for actions both positive or negative. So what have we learned? That habits are actions that you start to do by thinking about, but end up doing without really thinking. That roughly 40% of the actions you do each day are habits. But because habits take up such a large part of your time, they're hugely powerful, have the potential to do a lot of good, but also a lot of harm. We've learned that school is a place where it's important to work hard, not just to get good qualifications, but also to develop habits. That good qualifications, while important, are not enough on their own. You also need good habits. We also know about what habits are in terms of how the brain works. That when we start doing an action, the higher part of the brain that deals with complex thinking takes the lead. However, once we do it again and again, the automatic part of the brain starts to take over, and this is when the action becomes a habit. That eventually this automatic part of the brain decides when to start the action in the first place, although of course we're still aware we're doing it. Finally, we have learned that all habits have three separate parts: the trigger that gets to start the action itself, and finally the reward. Also, just as there are lots of different types of habit, there are also many different types of trigger. I hope you found this talk interesting, but I'm not going to pretend that what you've been told on its own is very useful. To be useful, you need to know how to use this knowledge to build good habits as well as get rid of bad ones. Unfortunately, however, for now I've run out of time, so I'll have to wait till next week. This talk is based on the book The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do and How to Change by Charles Duhigg. The talk is focused only on the first part of the book, looking at how habits for individuals. The book has two further parts not covered in the talk, which are also really interesting. One looks at how habits work within organisations, particularly companies, while the other looks at habits of societies and the idea of free will. If you have time, I'd strongly recommend reading the book. It's successful while being very well researched. Even the first part contains lots of interesting material that I couldn't include due to limited time. For a full script and PowerPoint to the talk, please visit the Times Educational website and search the resources using Rufo Rufus. Thank you.